All right. What are we? Green?
Yeah.
Okay. Missing. Who are we missing?
Chloe is, I think it's
Okay, we got somebody in the restroom. Oh. Me in here?
she's on both sides.
All right. Riley. No, we're green. Ethan, Ellen, Chloe, Abby, Paul. Brianna. You gonna come in late? I'm gonna have to change this on.
The raffle winners of this hour are Alexander Stern,
Right?
Taylor Seifert, Lawrence Schroeder, Isla Luna, and the staff member is Mrs. Sundquist.
Probably just giving you like candy or something, right?
It's just a bag of
I can't eat that anyway, so I don't need to win. Okay. All right. So obviously I missed Friday, and you guys were able to work on your annotated notes in class. Yes, if I recall correctly. Okay. Hopefully I gave you good instructions on what to expect and what we're doing today, and that is really discussing these political philosophies. And you might have kind of like, as you're reading these, kind of figuring that you're kind of looking at the human condition. So you're looking at, what kind of government works best for mankind or humankind, right? That's what these guys are trying to figure out, okay? And they have very different views, okay? And Hobbes and Locke are both English, okay? And then Rousseau's, I think he's Swiss, okay? But they're writing at roughly the same time. These are kind of chronological order, but they're all writing during the divine right rule in Europe, right? And these countries that they live in, okay? So in a sense, all three of them are committing some sort of treason by writing what they're writing here. And as you saw with Locke, he didn't publish it for 10 years after he wrote it, right? Because he really did fear for his life, okay? Because he was rejecting this divine right that the king claims, okay? So let's start with Hobbes. You have that quote at the very top, right? It says, "Life in a state of nature would be nasty, brutish, and short." He's really famous for that one, okay? And you guys, I think probably, Mr. Swords, you guys probably went over this to some extent with Swords and world history. But they all talk about the state of nature. This is not something we talk about today, is the state of nature. What is this? What are they talking about, the state? What do you think they mean by the state of nature? Yeah.
Sort of like people before organized government.
Yeah, before civil society, right? So, I mean, if you ever watch Discovery Channel, the animal kingdoms, right? Like the law of the jungle. That's kind of how I see it. Man left to their own devices with no government. We call that anarchy, right? What would we do to each other with no laws? No civil society? Would we destroy each other? You guys ever watch, what is that? Lord of the Flies? Is that it? You guys ever seen that? Okay. Lord of the Flies. Oh, it's a freak. Okay, it's about a group of children that are stranded on an island and how they form their civil society, and it's not good. It's not good. Say Hobbes has a pretty pessimistic view of mankind. Yeah. So in this state of nature, he describes us, right? What are some of the characteristics of man he describes? There's, subjective. Yeah, selfish, self-interested. but yet rational, okay? Yes, and rational plays a big role here, okay? Because man recognizes, because he's rational, how awful he is, and how awful those around him are. You actually might not think he's awful, but the world around him is awful, and so he needs protection, right? So the rationale is, hey, we need a strong government to control our combative and destructive ways, right? That's a rational choice, guys. So that you can live in a safe or peaceful society, you need somebody to control people, right? That's what he's saying. He calls for an absolute monarch, right? And that's what they already have. So he's not being too treasonous. He doesn't really talk about a God-given right of the absolute monarch, which could get him in trouble. You know what I mean? But yeah, let's talk about the subjective. Okay, a lot of times we use this term subjective truth, right? And I know you guys have had religion classes here and have studied this. And because I didn't grow up in the church, right? So I didn't learn a lot of this stuff till later on, until I started reading, you know. I like to read fiction, spy novels. I like historical fiction, and then I'll read some, historical stuff as well. But so I finished my book. I usually have two going at a time. Finished my books. I didn't have anything to read. My wife has a library. I mean, and so I'm just kind of going through her books, and I pick one out, and it's called Mere Christianity. You've heard of that? Yes, of course you have, right? By C.S. Lewis. Okay. So I start reading this. Have you ever dabbled in this, read this in Mere Christianity? It's quite fascinating. And some of it's doing this. It's going right? But enough stuck. I mean, I kind of had an epiphany reading this book. And it was like, this is really good. This is really interesting. It explains a lot. Okay. And really in the book, Mere Christianity is taken from a series of speeches or talks he's doing on the radio during World War II in London. Okay, so that makes it a little more fascinating too. But in this, he talks about how do you debate an atheist? You know what I mean? And he starts talking about subjective truth because obviously atheists have a subjective view of life, of truth. And so basically, what is this? What does this mean? Okay. Well, what if you had chocolate chip ice cream and I didn't? And I said, I want chocolate chip ice cream, but I don't have any. So I'm going to take it from you because I want it, and that makes me feel good. And because it makes me feel good, it's okay to take it from you. That's my truth. Do we not have people in this country right now that do that every day? That steal from others? They have their own truth. Okay? We call this today, there's a more modern term for this, is what? Moral relativism. Yeah. Okay? And so, our truth is what we make it, or what we feel is good for us. That's our truth. And this can be very bad. Okay? As we see in society today. Moral relativism, obviously leads to a breakdown, not just of morality, but of society, our laws, and so forth, because people don't respect the law, okay? Because it's not their law, all right? So, yeah, so we get to the subjective truth, we get selfishness and so forth, and then the rationale to build a strong government. He does some really interesting stuff in here about even seemingly altruistic acts are truly selfish. Like when adults have children. The reason for having children. So the only reason you have them, so you can use them for labor, and then when you get old, they'll take care of you. Now, do you remember when your first ancestors moved to Kansas? Do you know when they first came to Kansas? Oh.
They had a farm and they got the land from the
Okay, okay. So maybe 1800s, late 1800s, okay? And they came from Germany, okay? And they farmed, right? And so if you're a farmer, you need kids. You need labor on the farm. You can't do it yourself, right? And you're kind of hoping that at least the first couple of those kids are boys, right? I mean, this is the situation they have, in China, where because they had a one-child policy because of just overpopulation, you wanted to be a boy. And so in your societies have this patriarchal society where the girls in the family cannot, take the will, the estate when the parents die. It has to go to a male. Can't go to a female. And some of those ideas were brought here to the United States. Now, of course, we have laws today that protect women and girls from that sort of thing. But if you think about the time period, this is survival, guys. And you're trying to farm in Kansas, and you don't have the farm equipment you need. You don't have the resources you need. You need children, and the more the better. Now that's more mouths to feed, but it's more hands to work. Okay, and then when you get old, they don't have nursing homes or assisted living places where you can send mom and pop if you don't want to deal with them anymore. Right? You need the kids. So, I mean, Hobbes, he's speaking from a different century that we're living in. It's a different world. It's about survival. Okay? I hope this hasn't been the case for any of you, that you worried about where your next meal was coming. I hope that's never been the case for you in your life. I hope it never will be the case for you. But for these people, your great-grandparents, there may have been days like that. You know what I mean? So, I know somebody mentioned this, and I'd never heard this in this discussion yesterday. They said, does this man know what love is? What about love? You love your kids. It's a different world. I mean, like, I have these kids, and I'm like living my dreams, for my kids. I'm kidding, but not really. I mean, like, I played baseball. Son played baseball. Okay, I'm an athlete. My daughter's an athlete. Okay, now she's a much better student than I am. And then you have the influence of mom. Okay, so my kids are both better students than I was because of mom. Hopefully some because of me too. Okay. You've heard this living vicariously for your children, right? Okay, well, there's a lot more of that today, than there was back then. I mean, they weren't worried about what their kids were going to grow up to do. Their kids were going to grow up to farm. And hopefully the girls would marry a good husband. Somebody that would help take care of them. Right? It's a different world. Okay, so yeah. All right, so we got a pretty good understanding, right? Yeah.
What I don't understand is if you felt that all people were like that, then why did you think the government would be any different if you wanted to be so control?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you did the second treatise on civil government, Locke talks about that. The prince, they don't answer that anymore, right? Yeah, I mean, you're hoping you have a good king, right? And I imagine through the years, I mean, if you look back at history, there's been some good kings, but mostly they're bad. They're selfish. They look out for themselves. That's the way it works. But yeah, I don't know. You guys studied this more recently than I have. I mean, can you think of some good kings? Yeah, David and Saul. I mean, like European kings, there's some good ones. William of Orange, William and Mary, they were all right. They followed the law, they gave up power to the parliament, George Washington gave up power after 2 terms. He didn't have to. He gave it up. He wasn't King George, but he could have been. We would have let him. If he wanted to be king, we would have let him probably. God bless that man, George Washington. I'm telling you, man, he's my favorite. You know, not the smartest, not the most genius, but good, pious Christian man, believed in God, leaned on God, you know. Yeah, he's the man. Okay. All right, let's talk about Locke. Okay. Now, he talks about nations. Let's look at this, the top quote there, right? The law of nature, given to us by who? God, commands that we do no harm to others in regard for their life, liberty, or possessions. We all have the right to life, liberty. Okay. Oh, wow. These are important words for us. Okay. So, Locke. Social contract theory, that we must enter back into a state of nature temporarily to form a new social contract. Forming what type of government? What did Locke advocate? What? Okay, really representative democracy, not true democracy. You see that more with Rousseau, this direct democracy. Okay? Locke's a little more measured than that. But obviously, he's a Christian. He believes in God. Okay, so I like this part where he says that the state of nature is pre-political, but not pre-moral. So when God created nature, the state of nature, it had morality. It was born with morality. Okay, so that precedes man, precedes civil society. Okay, so that's your starting point with Locke. He's going to say a lot about his philosophy. Okay, now I don't know whether Hobbes believed in God or not. I don't know, but it is pretty clear that Locke did, because he uses the Bible a lot as his reference point for a lot of his philosophy. Okay. For instance, when you talk about property, okay, now there's that little blurb in here about the Native Americans and the Europeans that you probably didn't take too kindly to, right? About how if they were nomadic, and since they were nomadic, well, they didn't settle, it's not their property. If we settle here, we work on it, we bleed on it, we toil on it, we sweat on it, and own this property. Okay. Now, I know this is a view that would be rejected today. Yes, by most people. Okay. So it is used, though, however, as an excuse. Now, where he gets this property idea is from Genesis. So when God created man, he created Adam, and he gave Adam domain over the earth. And then he destroyed the earth. God did. And then he granted who domain over the earth? After the great flood. No. Okay. So this is what Locke uses as a reason for property. Okay. The ability to own property. Okay. Or the right to own property. Okay. So the state of nature, morality exists, and he believes in not subjective, but correct? Yeah. Appreciate your input here. If you got any. All right. If I were to ask you, what is truth? Now you can go to the dictionary. I have 4 of them up there. Okay. You go to any of those dictionaries and look up truth. And it's going to say something like that what we can see, witness, recognize as reality. True. Something to that effect, would you agree? Is that what you're gonna read? Okay. Is that how you would define truth? Anybody want to take a stab at defining truth? And I can give it to you from a Protestant perspective. And I don't know whether you share the same view as me. But a few years ago, my wife and I did this, it's like a Bible study called the Truth Project. Okay? It's fascinating. It took about 8 weeks. And it's about the Bible and what we can prove from history, you know what I mean, about the Bible, what we can prove archaeologically, and so forth. But in the end, you come away with this thought that, truth is God. God's law is truth. God's word is truth. God is truth. Okay? That's kind of just how I view it. Okay? When we talk about objective truth, we say, okay, there is right and there is wrong, right? That is objective. There is good and there is evil. Now, are we born knowing the difference between these two things? Are we born good or are we born evil? We're born good, aren't we? With the stain of sin, correct? Yes? Okay? So, we are good, but we have a propensity to commit evil. Now, when you guys make a decision, and you're thinking about doing something, and that little voice in your head says, maybe I shouldn't say this, or maybe I shouldn't do this. What is that little voice in your head called? Conscience, right? Now, you guys have all taken biology. Some of you have taken anatomy. Can you go to an anatomy map of the human body and show me where that is? The conscience? You can't point to that? So where do we get that? Where do we get this conscience? Do dogs have it? You know those cute videos where like the dog chews up something at the house, the owner comes home, and they're filming the dog, and the dog's over there cowering in the corner? They're talking to you. This is where you get into that debate over. Right? You guys take psychology? That's a big thing in psychology too. Right? That dog behavior is a learned behavior. Nurture. Right? What do we have? Nature through God, God's nature that He made, right?
Here's the natural law.
Okay. Very nice. That's written on our heart. Okay, see, I didn't know that. Okay, good. Thank you for sharing. No, seriously, because I love this stuff. I mean, this is the stuff that's deep. It's important. Okay. So if this is written on our hearts through natural law, through God, this is good. And He gives us a conscience so we know, right? And then some of our conscience is nurtured by our parents and society around us, yes? Right? So it's a combination with our conscience, okay? Where some people will be politically correct and be very careful not to offend somebody, other people are nurtured in a different way to say what they feel. You know, I'm not worried about your feelings. Okay, I'm just going to say it. Okay, now everybody's different. Okay, so we make this up, part of it, and then part of it's implanted on us. So okay, so if we have this conscience, this is what Locke thinks. Okay, so Locke thinks because we have this, We don't need as strong a government to rule over us, right? In fact, we may even be able to rule over ourselves. We're going to have to give up some of our liberties, some of our freedoms to live in a safe society, but we will choose the people to make those restrictions on us, those laws that restrict our behavior. We will choose those people to do it through representative government, not through a king. Okay? And so this is going to have a huge impact on the founders of this country. Hey, just get here when you can.
I try my best.
You just missed amazing talk here. Good thing I'm recording it though. Okay. Now, okay, so Locke, he also says this. He says the legitimacy for government. Okay, what makes government legitimate? For the king, it's hereditary, or God makes them legitimate. The legitimacy for government comes from whom? The people. That's the social contract, right? From the people. We allow government to rule over us. God doesn't. We do. This is our choice. This is our government. Okay? And God gave us the free will to form a social contract and set up a system. Okay? Now, he says we have to enter back into a state of nature to do that. For the United States of America, that state of going back into the state of nature is called the American Revolution. Right? Where we're going in, we're killing the enemy, and we're going to free ourselves from them. That's this. We're entering back into it. Okay? And then we'll form a new social contract, which originally starts with the Articles of Confederation in 1781 during the war. That social contract didn't work too well, as we'll learn all about. And then they formed a new one. And that, going back into that state of nature, was called the Constitutional Convention in 1787. And then they will write a new social contract. Okay? That's our Constitution, is our social contract. Okay? Now, if we fast forward to page 30 in your book, you'll find the Declaration of Independence. Okay? And we're going to look at the first two paragraphs. The first paragraph, guys, is basically explaining to the British, hey, we're about to tell you why we're leaving. We're breaking away. Okay? It's the right thing to do, is to explain to you why we're leaving. We're going to declare our reasons. Okay? The second paragraph gets into the details. Okay? So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator. Who? God. Their creator. With certain unalienable, not natural rights. Okay, so his natural rights of Locke, right? Life, liberty, and property. Right? These are inalienable. Okay, if you look that up, basically means you can't take them away. They are fixed. They are there forever. Okay? Inalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Who wrote these words? Thomas Jefferson. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among who? Men. Deriving their powers from who? The consent of the governed, from men. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, that does not secure these rights, okay, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing such powers in such form as to themselves seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now, what did Locke say? Locke said, if these rights are not secure, he used a better term. You can overthrow the government. Jefferson used alter or abolish it. Now, guys, every 2 years when we go to the polls to vote, that's where we tend to alter our government. Okay? But if government becomes tyrannical and does not secure your natural rights or your inalienable rights, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's not just the right to overthrow your government or abolish it. Okay? Jefferson would say, in many of his writings, it's our obligation to. Therefore, in the Second Amendment to the Constitution, after they listed 5 freedoms that included speech and religion, they put the Second Amendment. They gave you the right to own a gun. Because there's no way we're declaring our independence from Britain without muskets. It doesn't happen. And we don't overthrow our government today without guns. Now, I'm not advocating for revolution. Okay? If Jefferson were living today, would he feel like our rights were being secured? I think he would. Okay? I think there's no call for revolution right now. Okay. Now, what happened on January 6th at the Capitol? It was an insurrection. I think that's fair to call it that. Okay. You had a lot of angry people. Were they misled somewhat? Maybe. Maybe they were. Okay. Should they have stormed the Capitol? No. Okay. I don't think they should. That's a personal feeling. Okay. They did break the law to do that. So no, you should not break the law. Okay. However, as we're going to learn, guys, throughout American history, this country was born out of protest. It was born out of illegal protest. Okay. We celebrate with people like the Sons of Liberty. Well, when they did the Boston Tea Party, were they not breaking the law? When they tarred and feathered British tax collectors, were they not violating the law? We celebrate that. And when Black Lives Matter or Antifa is having a protest that turns into a riot, or where they violate the law and block the highway, which is illegal, do we throw these people in jail for 30 years when they break the law? No, we don't. Okay, this is not the first time this type of thing has happened before. What we saw on January 6th. First time the Capitol's been stormed. Yes. Okay. This is not the first time we've seen this behavior before in this country. Okay, and we have to be careful about how bad we punish these people. As we will read Jefferson's words over and over again. Okay, he said, the tree of liberty, from time to time, the tree of liberty, time to time, must be refreshed with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. You guys know manure helps plants grow, right? The natural manure of the tree of liberty is the blood of tyrants and patriots that shed their blood in defense of liberty when tyrants take it away. Okay? We reserve the right. This is our founding document, the Declaration of Independence. We reserve the right, the people, to alter or abolish our government. Okay? And we haven't had a revolution since. Okay? So we have not abolished our government. Have we changed our government over time? Yes. Every 2 years we do. We elect new representatives. We elect new senators. Every 4 years we elect a new president. Okay? So that's generally how we do it. Okay? There's grassroots movements that move through society that help change the country. Okay? So, but it's there. Because these men studied history. And they understand that through the history of the world, almost every government becomes tyrannical. Okay? And here's how we resolve it. So, interesting stuff from Locke. All right? Now, so, Protestant guy here again. Okay, so I married a Methodist, all right? And my wife was a cradle Methodist, so she always went to the Methodist church. We get married. I'm a Presbyterian. And so we go to the Methodist church here in Wichita. We do Bible study, and we go through book of the Bible and book of the Bible. We did this for like 8 years with this small group at church, okay? And then after a while, somebody says, why don't we try something different, like look at maybe like the impact of religion on the founding of the country. They all look at me, the history teacher, right? And they say, why don't you find a book, Mr. Bright? Or they call me Mr. Bright. Charlie, find a book, okay? And so I did some research. I found this book. It's called Christianity and the Constitution, the Faith of the Founding Fathers, okay? And you know, when you guys write a paper, you source, you document, you cite where you get your information, right? The founders did the same thing. When they wrote, they cited what they were reading, where they borrowed from, and so forth. And so the author of this book does a pretty interesting couple of charts here, okay? And so they do citations by decade over different categories of literature. So in the 1760s, the number one cited distribution was Enlightenment authors, okay? Number two was the Bible, okay? Common law, classical literature. 1770s, a decade later, of independence and the Tea Party and the massacre and all that, the number one cited book was the Bible by the founder. Okay, then you go to most cited thinkers. Okay, you hear names like Montesquieu, Blackstone, Locke, the top three cited thinkers by the founder. Now, you guys heard of Blackstone? And you guys, if you're thinking about studying law, Blackstone is kind of the author of English common law. And so if you go to law school, you're going to read Blackstone, a lot of it, okay? As when we get into the 1780s with the Constitution, the number one cited thinker was Blackstone, because they're writing the law, they're writing the Constitution, you understand? And then if you look at most cited thinkers by decade, Locke is the number one cited thinker of the 1760s and 1770s. So Jefferson did not plagiarize from Locke, but he certainly borrowed from Locke. Yes? Okay. And that's why we're talking about it. All right. And going back to the roots of what Locke's philosophy, where's that come from? Okay. Which means that's where we come from as a nation. Okay. Now, all this talk of God today, didn't mean to get preachy with you. Okay. But listen, my good friend, Mr. O'Connor, that is teaching honors government over at Northwest High School right now, cannot teach you what I just taught you about your own country, about the truth of the founding of this nation, or the truth in general as we describe truth today. That means 90% of children that go through our school system, our public school systems, do not learn the truth about this country. Now, were all these founders Christians? No. About 90% of them were, and the ones that weren't were deists that believed in God. And who do they point to as deists? They point to Franklin, they point to Jefferson, but if you read them, if you read enough Franklin and you read enough Jefferson, you're going to get some Christianity in it. Okay? So these men believed in God. And they believed in God's providence. They believed, and Madison said this country, this system will only work for a moral people. So as this country moves farther and farther away from God, and more people have this subjective truth and don't believe in this truth, will we not need a stronger and stronger government to control us if we lose this? That is my fear. So you guys know the truth. So it's your job to spread the truth. No pressure. You're the 10%. I don't know. It worries me. You know what I mean? This moral relativism of our society. Okay? The breakdown of the family. People they don't get taught the difference of this. They don't get taught this. I was one of those kids. I didn't go to church. Now, my family stayed together. I'm grateful for that, but we didn't go to church. We stopped going when I was 3. I mean, I didn't learn this stuff. Catching up. Still learning. Right? So, yeah. All right. I think I've probably exhausted most of this. I don't think I can cover Rousseau today. Okay? He's a peach, man. This guy. He's pretty interesting. But yeah, hopefully, yeah, okay, on the test, on the first test, you're going to have to compare and contrast Hobbes and Locke's political philosophy on social contract. Okay? That'll be on the objective day where you're doing the matching, you're listing a couple of listing questions, and a long answer. Okay? On Locke and Hobbes. Okay? And then the essay portion will come. We'll get to that. We'll start in on that before long. On Rousseau, since you're not going to be here on Thursday, his focus is on the direct democracy, like I said. Have you guys studied the French Revolution? A little bit? Okay. I think maybe this semester you'll be reading Tale of Two Cities. Okay. So that gets you into the French Revolution some. The American Revolution and the French Revolution are very different. And Locke's impact on the American Revolution, and then Rousseau's impact on the French Revolution, and watch for how different those two revolutions were. Okay, we were fighting the British Empire, the strongest military. Okay, the French were fighting themselves. Okay, and it was bloody. Okay, it's a more radical view of democracy. Okay, that led to mob action. Okay, we didn't have the mob during the American Revolution. We had the Continental Army with some militia. Okay, fighting against the Redcoats, and we engaged the Redcoats where we had a chance that we thought to win, and if we didn't have a chance to win, we ran. And you know, held out. You know, we held out to victory. You know, I mean, it was David versus Goliath for sure. Okay, the French Revolution is far different. Rousseau inspires that. So I'll talk about that tomorrow with the other, or Thursday with the other class, and then I'm going to get back into the notes. Okay. Now these notes coming up are going to be a lot about like different forms of government. Now what's a little bit tricky about this is different forms of government based on different criteria. So like forms of government based on where they obtain the power. So we talked about monarchies, right? The power from God, or it's hereditary, right? Or different forms of government as economic systems. So we'll talk about socialism, communism, mercantilism, capitalism. Different forms of government based on where the geographic distribution of power takes place. There's the power at the national level, at the local level, those different things. So that's what we got to get through in the notes there to really discuss different forms of government and economic systems. And then concepts of democracy, and then we'll get into, we're going to go back to 1215 and the Magna Carta. We're going to study the English constitutions. Magna Carta Petition of Right and the English Bill of Rights, and that impact on our government. Okay. Good? Thanks, guys. Good discussion. Appreciate your input. Bailey, you were here. No, yeah, good. I'm glad you're here. Okay. I recorded this for you guys and Brianna.